So today we're just going to talk about the Communications tab in Vista setup. Basically go through each of these fields and discuss what they do and how you can use them to hopefully get the network to pull what you need in terms of information from your data loggers. So we'll do the 20 minutes of conversation and 10 minutes of questions and go from there. So the first thing is that this is the communication tab, and there's one for each station that you have set up in your network. And each of these can, of course, have different configurations based on what that station happens to be. So we'll start with, this is a normal ultimate data logger. And what we'll do is just go through this screen here. The COM type is going to be the communications link that you have set up previously, so there's only going to be items in here that you've specifically configured. In this case, we have one set up for a telephone, which would be a phone modem. We have one that's set up for a sockets connection, which would be an IP address or over the internet. And we have 3 here set up for direct leased line connections, which I think, Ann, you're probably the only one who ever used those. So it's basically a serial connection directly to an instrument or a device in the field. Those are set up by going to what looks like a cell phone now. In the old version, it was a red telephone. But these are just the communication paths that can be taken by the software. Back to the communication tab. So we'll pick, this one is the sockets because it has an IP address and a port number. So we know that that should be sockets based on that communication. The other realistic option is a phone modem, which would be a telephone number instead. The DAS type is going to be the logger or instrumentation type that you're looking to pull. Our protocol list is quite long, but some highlights in it might be pulling an API instrument that's out in the field, or direct pulling of a BAM that's by itself. The BAM 9800 is the eBAM, and then the regular BAM is this one here. There's Campbell data loggers that we can support, and I know some of you are probably still using those for smaller sites or for meteorological data. There's several options, and some of them have changes to this form, so we'll go through a couple special cases as we proceed with our polling or our webinar here. The COM Center ID, if you're not aware, COM Center can actually be installed on multiple machines, and the responsibility for polling can be divided up among those instances. This isn't like a backup scenario like some states and agencies have been using, but this is like a load sharing possibility. And it was probably more likely used when phone modems were the primary method of communication, so that 2 servers could each have 10 modems doing all of the calling. A COM Center ID of 0 just means that it will go to a COM Center that is set to 0. And most everybody's COM Center right now is set to 0, which means it will take any number. So if a COM Center has a 0 ID, it can take any of these. If it has an ID of 1, it would only pull the ones that are set to 1. So this is just a way of load sharing your polling responsibility across your network. If that's something you're interested in, I just want to give a heads up that each computer with COM Center installed would take a seat from your pool of seats that you have available on your red and Vista hasp key. So just a heads up there. The max records is the number of records that each and every type of data stream would request at a time. That's 99% true. So a 10 record pull for hourly data would be 10 hours. If it were pulling minute data, it would be requesting 10 minutes worth of data. If it were 5-minute data, it would be 50 minutes of data at a time. So each of these records, each polling type would consist of 10 records. That also goes for calibrations even, for instance. The max tries is, and after I go through the form, I'll show how some of this stuff works together. The max tries is the chances that the polling is given before it's marked as a failure. So if it tries to connect to an IP address, but that IP address does not answer, it will try again and again with a max tries of 3. This can be increased, but 3 is probably enough to tell you if there's a true problem. Auto polling is pretty self-explanatory. If it is off, you can still do a manual poll, but if it is on, it would be polling according to the schedule that we'll talk about in a moment. The phone or IP port is going to be the location, the end point for the polling. A phone number would, of course, be dialed over a modem, and an IP/port would be a location based on TCP networking, so on the internet somewhere. This can be textual, so if you have something like dynamic DNS serving your IP address, you can use that instead of a straight IP address. Notice that there's a space here. If anybody is familiar with TCP networking, they'll know that it's normally a colon between the IP address and the port, but a space is important to our software so that it can parse the field correctly. The password and switch commands is a kind of a specialty box that if you need to do something before the logger polling begins, this is where it would go. 2 specific examples of this are first, in some states they have serial ports connecting to multiple instruments at a single station, so they need to switch between those serial ports. And what this does is it gives Comm Center an option to talk to the switch before it talks to the instrument. Another option, or another place that this is used, is for some phone modems that answer the phone require a password before they can pass the communications through to the instrumentation. That's just a security measure so that outside phone calls aren't coming in and getting the data from your loggers. So that this is where that password would also go. And then in some other protocols, it's used for other things, which I'll mention in a little bit. The baud rate is only used for telephone communications. That's why it's off here. And a modem string is the same way. We'll talk about secondary comm and dial adapter in a minute once we get through all these basic things. The day and night collect time intervals are going to be the frequency of the polling both during the day and the night. The reason it's split out is in case, well, it's kind of a legacy thing now, I think, but when long-distance phone calls were more expensive during the daytime, you might have wanted to have less frequent polling. So in that case, you might have said, oh, every 2 hours is fine during the day, and then do it every 60 minutes during the night. The offset is how much time happens after the schedule before the polling actually begins. So this would pull 1 minute after every hour of the day and night. That just gives the logger time to ensure that the averages are calculated correctly and completely for hourly polling, or really any interval of polling. And it gives any logger a chance to do that, whether it's an ESC or Campbell or our stuff. The daily hour and the calib hour are only important in some very obscure protocols, so I'm not going to touch those at this time because I don't think anybody's really using them anymore. The time update will tell Comm Center to check for the time on the data logger, and if it says the time update is on, then the time will be updated. This is clearly very wrong, so I hope that's why we have it off. Hilo is a site in Hawaii, And if the time update were on, we would be setting Hawaii's data logger to 1 hour ahead of our time, which is really very, very wrong. The site ID is a indicator of an address within the data logger. In an ESC, it's a 2-digit character. In NVDAS FW, this field is actually not used. It's on another form, which I'll show you in a moment. And in Ultimate, it is the site ID within the list of sites that an Ultimate can store. So Ultimate PLC here, this will go to the first site that is in that data logger. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Ultimate can actually handle multiple sites at one time. So that's what this addressing is important for. In these checkboxes here, which you'll see change as we go through other protocols in a little bit, these are the different data streams that can come in. This is for Ultimate PLC polling, so this is an NVDAS Ultimate data logger, and these checkboxes each mean different things. So the first one is instant calibration data, which is the 1 second, or actually the samples that occurred during calibration, not the averages, but the samples. All calibrations means that it will pull the averages from the calibrations. This is what you see when you look at a calibration report in Vista. The digital monitor status, these are the instrument alarms that occur on an instrument in order to allow you to know if a flow is bad or something like that. So these are the on or off alarms within the context of the instrument. The diagnostics is the numbers, usually the numbers behind the digital monitor alarms. So if a digital monitor alarm is there for a flow rate, then the diagnostics is there to tell you what that flow rate was at that time. The edit history is available in case you have enabled editing at the station level, which is generally not recommended, but some agencies have requested for that type of ability. If you pull this, then any edits that occurred at the station would come through as an edit history record that is inserted into Vista. Digital inputs, if you have an Atom digital input card, then this is where they would be recorded for this station. The logbook are the manually entered logbooks that are done within the context of the reporter tool at an Ultimate station. And the power off report is just the basic, the power was out from this time to this time. The day limits definition, again, the polling definition for the day start and end is reflected up here. So from 7 to 7 at 60 minutes, and again, it's kind of a legacy thing. And the last thing that's important to understand is the comm speed, which is in milliseconds. So this is waiting 500 milliseconds before it says that it did not get a response. So I guess this is more like a wait time instead of a comm speed, if you want to think of it that way as well. There are 4 options. There's fast, which is 350 milliseconds, slow, which is an extended period of time, and manual, which you can basically put up to 9,999, basically 10 seconds of wait time if you have a very, very bad connection. So those are the main parts of the form, and I promised I'd go over some other protocols, and I'd also promised that I'd give you some examples of how to use things together. So if you're having troubles with communicating with a station, say you're not getting all of the data, or it seems to be dropping out after a period of time, say it's a cellular connection that is pretty weak, or maybe a phone with a lot of noise, the first thing that I would do to troubleshoot that is change the comm speed to an increased wait time, maybe about 5,000 in this box, or 4,000, something like that. And then I'd also change the max records, because this gives it less to have to transmit back to comm center over the potentially shaky connection. So I might even, if it's a really bad connection, if we took this down to 4 and we said we're going to wait 5 seconds for those 4 records, then we'd have a very good chance of getting the data over a weak connection. Now, if you have a very fast connection and you want your data faster, of course, what I normally start with is 24 here, just because that is a day of hourly data. You could even do 48 if you had a very, very robust connection. And when you're getting that much data, you might still want to leave the comm speed to a slower setting to allow the data logger to have the time to compile its response and format it for transmission back to comm center. So for a very, very fast polling type of connection, I could even see this being a great setting. So 48 records with a slow comm speed, just so that everything has a chance to come back in. Let's see here. I don't know if I have any switch commands in here. This is a good example of another protocol, though. This is a Campbell CR1000. Some of you might be familiar, some of you might not. Here's one of those things where the fields start to mean different things based on the different logger types. So you'll see the max records here is 1024. In this case, we're not actually talking about records. We're talking about positions within the data logger itself. If you know Campbell's, you probably know what that means. Otherwise, 1024 is the basic entry here for a Campbell. But also with a Campbell, this has another meaning in and of itself, where it says the hourly average. That is the name of a table within a Campbell data logger. So that gives you an idea of another way that these fields might be used depending on the protocol that you're using. We can talk about that in a little bit, I guess. I don't think anybody would really use it too much now, but we'll talk about it. The address for Campbell is another thing that's different. In this case, it's 1, but that just means that it's the only logger there. A Campbell can actually be on a network with many other Campbells, and this would tell the user, or tell the program where to go to find the specific data logger you're looking for. I bring up the Campbell because it is one of the most varied protocols, so it has a lot of differences in the way it's pulled. Let's see what else we have here. Here's a BAM, and again, you see the specialized address of 01. Let's see. I don't think I have anything pulling a switch, unfortunately. No. If you hover over this box, though, you'll see that a switch command has these different elements to it. Some of those are wait times. When you see a number in brackets, that's a wait time, and then some of these are other commands that are sent before the logging begins. Again, this is like if you have a filter device, 2025. At the same place, you also have an drdas FW data logger, and you want to share a connection between them over like a digi modem. The state of Michigan does that pretty well. Let's see here. Secondary comm is something that is a way to help ensure communication occurs because it gives you a backup method to talk to an instrument. So you can see here that there's an drdas FW. It's at this IP address, and with that port, if this fails for some reason, then the secondary comm will take over after those 2 tries. So in this case, it would have a telephone number with Andy's cell on it. So I guess we won't try to pull that one. But it has the same types of features that the previous communication has, where you have the collection time and intervals. So this would try every minute on the telephone line. It has a max records that's specific to this backup communication. Usually, the primary communication would be an IP address, and the backup communication would be a telephone. I can think of very few, if any, realistic scenarios where you'd want the phone to be the first one to try, and you'd want the IP address to be the second. But that's maybe a good, it's not a good way to go. Sorry. Tyler, you said that you're set up this way? Tyler must not have his phone on. Okay. I think Tyler was trying to say that he does this backup polling as well. And Anne, I know that we were working on backup polling with your specific type of instrument, so there's certain instruments that it works better for and certain instruments that it does not work as well for. I wish Tyler's phone were on so he could let you know that it works well for them in their NVDAS FW network. Then there's a dial adapter. This is a basic internet situation where if you need to connect to an ISP via phone line, you would be able to then put in a username and password here so that you could, after connecting to an internet connection via a phone modem, then pull a site by an IP address. That's very, very rarely used anymore, but it's still supported in case it's necessary. I wanted to show two more things before we go to questions. I know I'm running a little over, and I've been all over the place, but I want to show an NVDAS FW compared to an ultimate. So we see here there's 2- and 3-point cals and then multi-point cals within the polling types for NVDAS FW. And then if we go to the ultimate, you can see that it's instant calibration versus all calibrations. So the point is that some of these protocols have built-in form changes that allow you to alter or to actually understand exactly what you're pulling from the devices. Hopefully, more of these form changes will be implemented so that it's clearly understood what you're pulling. Here's an ESC site, and you'll see this one's very different because we only pull a couple additional parameters from an ESC. One of those is the calibrations, and one of those is what we call logbook entries, but an ESC would know it as a operator message, or I think an operator message. So we have all these different options for polling. They work together in many different ways to make sure that you can pull exactly what you're trying to get from the instrument. A lot of this seems like, well, how do you know that the ESC needs a 2-character address in the address field, and how do you know that an ultimate needs its address here where an NVDAS FW does not? And the answer to that is there's a tech note called DAS types, which should be available on SysAid or on any of the new loggers that have gone out in the last year and a half. This is a tech note that describes how to set up the polling for all these different types of instruments, and it's called DAS types. So I recommend reviewing that if you have questions on your specific needs, and if it's not documented there, we can certainly find out the information you need. Before I say questions, anybody, I see that Kyle asked a question in the chat window. He says, can you pull multiple IP addresses at the same minute? And the answer to that is yes, because an IP address opens in CommCenter as a separate little program, which is a part of the way CommCenter works. So each IP address is its own little polling program. That means that IP address A can pull at the same time as IP address B. The reason that this doesn't work for a phone modem is because the connection to the phone modem is the actual connection that's being made, and of course a phone can only dial one phone number at a time. So that's why it works with an IP address but not a telephone modem. Did that answer your question, Kyle? Okay, I hope so. Does anybody else have any questions?
This is Anna from Alaska, and I have a question. I'm not sure exactly if it's right, but I think on our NVDAS for Windows sites, we we don't have a secondary communication tab. And there's a little box where you can...
Yes, there's a reason for that.
Okay.
It is because you're using a version of Invista Setup that is not shown here.
Okay.
Since
That's fine.
this is going to be fixed.
Okay. It's going to be fixed?
This is the reason why I'm coming.
Okay.
Yeah, you're one of the last agencies to get the update to this version.
Okay.
So that's
right.
something I'm working on in a...
Okay. And so the other question I had was, I often get secondary communication alerts, email alerts, and we don't have a secondary communication protocol. So what do those mean?
I'd have to see the specific alert
Okay.
to understand exactly what you're actually getting.
It says it switches from primary to secondary comm.
For a specific site in general?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I get them for a lot of different sites, but often it's Floyd Dryden and Palmer, I think.
Well, with your older version of the setup, maybe there's some sort of flag that has been made, and we'll be able to see it better once I get your version updated. The good news is that
that will get fixed.
the good news is that I'll work on it tomorrow on your test database. I'll be able to look at it then.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions?
This is Mary from Idaho, and I'm just wanted to ask a quick question about the time update and the TZ offset. If you have the time update off, it doesn't matter what you have in the TZ offset, or are they tied together, or are they two completely different things?
That's a great question. They are tied together. So if the time update is off, then the TZ offset would never even really be looked at.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Sorry, this webinar was kind of all over the place. I really wanted to cover each and every item on this form so that it would be a very informational type of webinar to consult online. So I hope that everybody followed along, and if you have any questions or need to review it, I hope that Randy can have it posted within, by the time of our next webinar, along with the previous one about SysAid. So if there's no more questions, I guess we'll call it a webinar.